Hello, welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. This week, I have on the podcast Rod Graham. Rod Graham is an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice at Old Dominion University, and he coordinates the cyber criminology program down there at that university. He's doing some really good work over there. In this episode, we talked about a whole bunch of things. I think we went almost 2.5 hours. So this was a great conversation. We talked about his research on cybersecurity and criminology. We also talked about his research that he's doing in sex work and some of the various dynamics of sex work, mostly within the online community. We talked about the stigma and pushback on sex work. And then we kind of switched gears a little bit and talked about another topic that Rod is passionate about, which is critical race theory and just race in general. So we define and give some of the origins about critical race theory. We talked about the differences between scholarly and popularized elements of critical race theory, the goals and underlying assumptions of race theory. We also talk about the popularity of Ibram X. Kendi and his beliefs, along with the criticisms of his anti-racist and racist dichotomy. We also talk about Rod's piece on scientific fascism, which he just published on Medium this past week. And then we talked about, from that, aspects of statistical research methods, including the differences between qualitative and quantitative data and their use for understanding all data. And we talked about the state of the social sciences and many other topics. Rod is a good guy. He is very nice. He's, a very fun person to talk to. And I really appreciate his honesty and his ability to try and hear other positions and other ideas. And so we were able to, I think, make some really good headway in a lot of these topics. And it was a fun conversation. I greatly enjoyed it and hope to have him on the podcast again. So without further ado, I bring you Rod Graham. I am here with Rod Graham. Rod, what's going on, man?
I'm pretty good.
It's wonderful to have you on the podcast. I was on yours 2 weeks ago or whatever,
That's
your
right.
channel,
Something like that. Yeah, yeah.
and I had a blast, and I just I can't get enough of you. I gotta I gotta talk to Rod again. There's so many things to talk about.
Yeah, man. I mean, we talk a lot on Twitter and so we know that there are things to talk about and maybe some agreement and disagreement and
Yeah,
yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah.
yeah. Well, definitely a lot of things. I have some items on the agenda. I know you probably do too, so we can definitely hit those. But before we get into that, handful of people know who you are. You're pretty lively online, so that's always awesome. But there's people that don't know who you are. So maybe for some of the listeners, you can just give a small, condensed 2-minute bio. Just tell us what your uh, kind of history is and your training and your current research, what you're doing now, what you want to do in the future. Just kind of give like a snapshot overview of who Rod is.
Okay. Well, so Rod is a country boy from
Oh,
South Carolina, but he's not there anymore. He I graduated from an HBCU, South Carolina State University, and then University of South Carolina. And I was a biology teacher for a couple of years, and I left that, and I decided to go back to school for sociology. And so I got my PhD from the Graduate Center, City University of New York, in sociology.
nice.
Um, that was actually a pretty interesting career trajectory, and it has impacted how I see things actually, because I'm
Hmm.
not very leftist critical in my research because I started with that hard science background. But
Hmm.
since CUNY is a very leftist, type of environment, heavy on the crit stuff, I'm
Hmm.
saying that now because I know we'll talk about that.
Hmm.
So I'm somewhat familiar about it and comfortable with it, and so I can kind of bounce back and forth between those two worlds. So
How did
yeah,
you?
I got my PhD. I guess it was like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, how did you make that jump from biology into sociology? Biology is usually like a that's a good base. That's a really good good degree to get, and it kind of opens your world up into you could do a whole bunch of things. What was that? Just that jump into wanting to do the PhD in sociology after that.
Ignorance.
Okay.
I would actually, yeah, I would actually characterize my entire career up until maybe the past 10 years, 5 years maybe, as complete ignorance. So I was doing biology because that's what you do when you come from a working class background. Or I was a teacher, I should say, because that's what you do. You want a
Mhm.
stable job. So you teaching,
Sure.
nursing, policing, these are the types of things that
Yeah.
poor and working class people get into.
Hmm.
So I was teaching, and one day I just went to a bookstore and I bought a book called Sociobiology by E.O. Wilson,
Hmm.
famous
Hmm.
book actually. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, "Oh wow! So it's possible that I can study society from a biological angle."
Hmm.
Now, at the time, I didn't know that that's rarely ever done. I didn't know that. I just thought that was just. I thought this was the book, like because I had who in my family went to graduate school, so I couldn't ask anyone about the politics of graduate school, specializations, all that stuff. So
Hmm.
I just applied to the local college,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
when I got in, they were like, "No, that's not how it's done." And so, so I had to learn a different way. But I was glad I made the decision because I fit there more, or I fit sociology more than I do biology, I believe.
Nice. And so now you're a tenured professor. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I'm at Old Dominion University.
Uh huh.
That's in Norfolk, Virginia, and I'm an associate professor there with tenure. I just got that last year,
Congrats. That's
and
nice.
which is good to get it before the pandemic because I got to do
Yeah.
absolutely nothing this year. I mean, I was really lazy, so which is not good, But I'm starting to get things going again with some current research. But yeah, and I am the coordinator of their cybercrime program. I should say cyber criminology. And so we graduate students with a degree that combines criminology with, I wouldn't say computer science, maybe IT and certain aspects of cybersecurity.
Nice.
And so, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. That's really nice. Yeah. I think I definitely want to ask you a little bit about that, but I guess that brings us mostly to who you are at the moment. What's your current research or your upcoming things you're looking at studying, whether formally or informally, that you got going on right now?
Yeah. So currently, I am exploring the clients of escorts. So it's
Hmm.
sex work research
Hmm.
broadly. And I'm looking at this online forum. I think it's called International Escorts. I'm not entirely sure, but it's a huge online forum where where each forum, oh no, it's a huge online website where each forum is about a specific area of the world.
Hmm.
And so I'm looking at London, and it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative research. So I did some
Sure.
numerical textual analysis just to see what men were saying in a sort of quantitative sense. And now I'm past that part, and they're all saying positive things, nothing negative,
Hmm.
no sense of demeaning people or anything like that, which is
Hmm.
what I kind of expected. And now I'll be doing the qualitative part where I'm looking more in depth at the conversations online. So.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
So let's start with I guess the work that you do. I know for people that follow you online and everything, they probably see a lot of the the critical race stuff.
That's
But
right. Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
and we'll get into that. But first, so tell me about the work with the you said cyber security or criminology or tell me about that stuff.
Yeah. So again, all through ignorance, how that occurred. So my first job, it's kind of weird when you relay this stuff to someone in real time in like 10 minutes, how crazy it sounds. It just shows how life
I
pushes
totally
you in different
understand. I
directions.
totally understand.
So my first job, I was at Rhode Island College in Providence, Rhode Island. And I my dissertation was on computers and technology. No, technology and music.
Hmm.
Consumption patterns. It was just this data analysis of who consumes what by race and class and gender, a standard sociological study.
Wow, that's cool.
And I kind of stuck my thumb to the wind and said, the music stuff is, but that technology stuff is interesting. People will be interested in that for the next 20 years. So I'm just going to discard the tech stuff and discard the music stuff and focus on the tech
Yeah,
stuff.
right, right.
So I developed a course called cyber crime and another course called digital sociology.
Oh,
So
cool.
then, when I got the job at Old Dominion University, it so happened that they were starting a cybersecurity major, and they wanted some social scientists who could talk about the online environment
Hmm.
from a what they call a human factors approach.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they said, "Okay, Rod, you want to teach this cybercrime course?" And I said, "Yes." Then they found that so many students weren't prepared for the cybersecurity stuff in terms of their background. So they said, "You know what? We need to start a major just for those." Rod, you want to do a cybercrime major? I was like, okay, fine. So, so that's how it started. So, and that turned out to be a good career move. It really gives me a lot of job security, a lot of career options, and so yeah, it's been good.
So you're running the program, or you're teaching the courses, or you're doing all of it, or how does it, I guess, work on the day-to-day stuff?
Yeah, I teach two courses in the program, and I
Mm,
design the program, make the changes necessary, and
nice.
so that's what the coordinator does. Make sure the college handbook reflects what I want to happen in the major,
Hmm.
and it's still a pretty small major. It started 3 years ago, maybe four now,
Hmm.
and we have like 80 majors.
Wow.
So that's a mid to small size major. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's good, and I did research on online stuff, cyberbullying and phishing, and
Hmm.
even my research now is cybercrime related with the sex work stuff. So I'm pretty much in that field now, and
Hmm.
I'll stay there for the rest of my career.
Yeah. So yeah, tell me about. I mean, that kind of blends into it nicely. How did you get into? I can see definitely the online component to it, but how did you get, I guess, into looking at sex work and understanding it and studying it? And it sounds like more on the um, maladaptive way in which it can be, people can be harmed or bullied or harassed or or
You
such, or
don't you
it's
don't like sex?
of course. Well, yeah, of course. Who
That's not the
doesn't?
reason I got into it, but I know people might think that, but it can be entertaining sometimes
Oh
when you go
yeah.
on those escort sites and you
I've
see
had
what you
I've
see.
had many colleagues. I actually know two at the moment that used to, they did it out west, but they used to do a lot of therapy and clinical work with sex workers,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
understanding kind of that subculture in that world. And yeah, it's deeply fascinating. It's deeply fascinating. So
Yeah, I got into it because when I was writing the textbook that I used to teach the class,
hmm.
there was a section on uh, cyber pornography. I think so. I think that's the chapter's name.
Hmm.
So I knew nothing about the explosion of sex work online and how varied it was. So I mean, everyone knows about pornography, but there's all kind of stuff. I mean, there's
Yeah, yeah.
camming and all
Yeah, I was just gonna say,
all that stuff.
can you kind of give a definition of that, of like what constitutes? I mean, you don't have to give a complete, definition of it, but like what kind of constitutes online sex work as opposed to, maybe offline, I guess.
Well, so sex work is just commercial sex. So you're
Hmm.
doing something sex related for money.
Hmm.
So that could be anything from just pornography,
Hmm.
because you're doing sex, you're making a recording of it and selling it,
Right.
or it can be this individual OnlyFans stuff that still counts as sex work.
Hmm.
And it could be the camming, it could be all of those things, or these personal things where, okay, which I think is going to be big in the future, where it's like, okay, you got me for 3 hours, me, you're just going to sit and chat. I see that coming actually with
Hmm.
the breakdown of bonds in society.
Hmm.
A lot of people are going to want that experience. So, but in any case, any type of sex online or sex in general that's being sold,
Hmm. Okay. And
and
so,
pornography is the big thing, but
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
And so I guess your work more specifically with it is what in particular? You're just looking at kind of the ins and outs of it, or you're looking at more of, some type of safeguard to make sure that this is done appropriately and that people aren't being harmed, or what's kind of the angle in which you're doing this type of research?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. So I believe that sex work will be a major issue in the next several years.
Hmm.
You've got this groundswell of people who are entering into sex work, and it's no longer this marginalized group of primarily women
Mm-hmm.
um, who just we get the sense they have to do it, right? But that's not what's going on now. You've got a lot of people who are going into it because it's safe. You got a lot of people who you might consider middle class. You've got women who have education, but
Mm-hmm.
given the economy
Yeah.
and given the safety of doing it online, they say, well, hey, this is a good way for me to make some money on the side or make it a career.
Mm-hmm.
So because that demographic is moving into it, that's going to shift things politically. That's a
Well,
group that has agency. They'll they'll support policies and they'll be more vocal. And you see it online now.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so and also the clients are increasing. So this isn't like some shady thing anymore that a guy will say, "Oh, come on, man, let's go get us a prostitute." This kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. That's not what's
Mm-hmm.
happening now. I mean, people are starting to see this as just a legitimate leisure activity.
Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit more normalized, if you will, in
Yeah, yeah.
terms of kind of the widespread accessibility of it, and more, I guess you could say, business-like in some way. But I guess as it becomes more, popularized in society, or more, destigmatized, I guess, how do you think that will, kind of push things in terms of, I guess, a larger conversation within society about that, but then also politically too, and how there's certain, I would imagine at some point, probably more specific laws that are designed to kind of protect folks and individuals that are doing this type of work. How do you just see it going, 5, 10 years from now, I guess?
Well, first there's going to be a pushback,
From
and a pushback.
Yeah, from like society, or from government, or what
Well,
pushback from.
society. There are going to
Okay.
be a lot of people who will say that women are being forced into this.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they're not, do you want to make that an outlet available for people
Mm-hmm.
because of possible consequences down the line? And I'm actually sympathetic to that
Mm-hmm.
because, yeah, suppose I had a daughter and she's 17 or 18.
Right.
And even if sex work is not as stigmatized as it used to be, what kind of decision? I mean, can an 18-year-old make that kind of rational decision to say, okay, college, 4 years down the line, I can get a degree in business, or can I do this online right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I can see parents saying, gosh, I don't know if I want my child to have that option.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be pushback from that. And then you also got religious groups.
Sure.
Um, but the main issue is going to be sex trafficking. And this is actually why I'm doing
Mm.
the research.
Okay.
The more we know about legitimate sex work,
Mm-hmm.
the the easier it will be to disentangle it from sex trafficking.
Okay. And how do you
Because
make that distinction, or how do you kind of untangle it?
right, well, we know the difference. We do.
Okay.
Sex trafficking is when someone is coerced into it,
Mm-hmm.
and anyone under the age of 18, or I guess it depends on the state who's an adult, but anyone who's not an adult is automatically sex trafficked because
Okay.
we assume they can't make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
So we know this. We also know that a lot of men date women initially who
Mm-hmm.
are vulnerable,
Mm-hmm.
and then say, "Look, you know what? We need some money here, and can you do this activity to keep us afloat?" We also see that as sex trafficking. So there are these little things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we know how it occurs. The thing is, though, because we don't know anything about sex work, every kind of sexual activity
It
we
gets put in
think
that
is sex
category.
trafficking.
You're right. Yeah. We dump it into that bucket
That's right.
of it's sex trafficking. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. I
right.
could see
That's right.
that. So then how would you, in your mind, I mean, again, you would know this, but way more than I would. How would you categorize then sex work, so that way we don't lump everybody into the same bucket?
Sex work is just voluntary. It's
Okay. So
just
so that's the big
just
difference.
yeah, right. And most women who go into sex work are doing it. I keep saying women because it's the dominant group,
Hmm.
but I'm finding that I really need to start widening the way I talk about this because yes, it is women who are
Hmm.
selling to men, um, but there's also women who participate in sex work I don't know, who purchase clients who are men, so heterosexual women. And then there's also homosexual activity, women and women, men and men. So it's a very complex
Sure.
thing here.
Yeah.
But the dominant mode is obviously heterosexual men and heterosexual women.
Mm.
But it's just doing it consensually, which
Mm.
most do.
Yeah.
There was this thing on Pornhub that I shared today,
Hmm.
where not on Pornhub, about Pornhub,
Okay.
where they are housing on their servers a lot of child pornography.
Oh, I did see this. Yeah, I saw
Yeah,
your
yeah.
posts and I saw a few other posts about
Mhm.
this as well. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, yep. I think Nicholas Kristoff posted it. I think he wrote about it, and then now it's getting shared everywhere. He's got
Hmm.
like 2 million followers.
Hmm.
Okay, so that's obviously sex trafficking,
Yeah.
and uh, so something needs to be done. But the response should not be to shut down Pornhub,
Mm.
because so many women are making, or people in general are making money, getting their livelihoods
Hmm.
from sex work. And so if you shut down this conduit, now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, so the public needs to know that there's a complex narrative out there. So when it comes, so when some politician gets up and tries to come to this kind of tough on sex work type thing,
Hmm.
people out there will be like, no, you're missing some things here. For
Hmm.
example, there's a bill that Donald Trump signed. It's called the Fosta Sesta bill.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to bore your listeners, so I'll
No, no,
move
no,
through
no. It's
quickly.
okay. Go ahead. No, no.
But it's a
Explain it.
bill where what's the name of that site that had all those Backpage? So
Uh-huh.
Backpage would be a
Hmm.
place where people would meet and all that stuff.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, well, there are a lot of anti sex trafficking organizations that said, look, sex trafficking is occurring on this space.
Hmm.
Before the bill was signed, if you owned a website, you had what would be called safe harbor provisions, meaning you're not responsible for what goes on those sites.
Mm-hmm.
You put it up, and someone does something that's not on you.
Hmm.
So once the bill was signed, those sites became responsible.
Mm.
So if someone is reporting some kind of sex trafficking activity or suspicious activity, then the site owner needs to take it down. So what sites started to do was say, look, I don't want to deal with it, so just forget it. No sex sold here,
Mm.
right? Just because they don't want the legal problem.
Yeah.
All right. Backpage defied this for a while, and that's why they got uh, removed from the web.
Hmm.
Okay, I thought it was a good bill
Hmm.
when it first came. I was like, great, dealing with sex trafficking, awesome. Who wants this? Then I had this series on my YouTube channel where I was talking with the
Hmm.
sex workers,
Yeah,
and
that's
all
right.
of them said, no, this is terrible.
Oh,
Because what you have now done is you've made it so that I can't safely advertise on a website. I now have to either get a pimp to protect me or go out on the street.
oh wow.
And given the fact that of the hundreds of thousands of ads on those pages, only a small percentage of sex trafficking goes on,
Mm.
what have you done? You
It-
may have certainly protected some children, but look how many adults
oh,
you've hurt. So
yeah,
it's those
yeah.
kind of nuanced things that are important.
Man, that is really complicated. Because it is, I think that right, if people are going to make their own choices and they're going to, voluntarily decide to do a certain type of work, I think you're right. There should be ways to safeguard that, right? At a policy level, how we understand it as a society. But you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so then it causes this void. And then it's like, okay, usually when that happens, then that there's just, not so good activity that can come on and people get hurt and all the rest. So um yeah, I guess the last thing I'll ask about this is you said this was you were doing some of the work internationally.
Mm.
So how does that look? I guess I don't want to make comparisons, right? But there's I think mostly what we've been talking about, I'm assuming, has been in the United States. But when you're looking at this work in Western industrialized countries or maybe other countries, yeah, that are or developing countries, like I can imagine it's like either some limited data or much different in terms of cultural norms and all the rest. So how does it look, I guess, internationally, this type of work that you're seeing?
I see. That's a good question, man. You ought to have a podcast. You think about it, you know. So I don't know about a lot of other countries. In general, Anglo countries tend to be a little more harsh, a
So
little more restrictive with sex work.
England,
So,
Scotland, Ireland,
yep, Australia,
France, Australia.
Canada, right? Um, However, New Zealand is the first uh, Anglo country to decriminalize sex work. But it's already been decriminalized or maybe legalized, I guess would be a different, there's a distinction there. In Germany, Switzerland, these types of places. So,
Okay.
but I chose London for a specific reason. It's because they are like the US in that the sale of consensual sex is banned.
Mm.
No, let me get this right. No, the sale of consensual sex is not banned.
Okay.
Okay. But all the activities around it are. So you can't, it's kind of weird. So you can't solicit, right? So if you get the money from someone for selling sex, it's fine. But you can't advertise that kind of stuff. Anyone who is involved in the activity, so a pimp or someone owning a brothel, they would be penalized. However, it would be a fine or jail time. I don't know what it is. So the actual act
It's
is,
fine.
yeah.
But
It's
everything
kind of
around it
weird.
just isn't. Yeah, that sounds inefficient.
It's a way of getting around restricting someone's liberties, but appealing to the public's need to prevent sex work, I guess. But I chose that because to me, that's the closest to what the U.S. Kind of is, and I think the U.S. might try something like that.
Mm.
So I said, okay, fine. I would like to study the U.S., but the way that website was, I guess they didn't want to get involved with the authorities because of the FOSTA SESTA stuff. So they didn't have a vibrant American escort conversation market or something. So I had to go to London, right?
I see.
Which works out fine. I mean, it's been out for 15 years, so I have a lot of data to
Wow.
look at.
Wow. Yeah, that's you can get some longitudinal data there and
Yeah.
look at over time. So um that's great. I mean, I gotta say, just as a pause here, it is interesting because I almost never hear you talk about this stuff. And so it's super cool to hear like
I'm the
another
secret
angle.
guy, yo. Yeah, it's
people
funny.
people are going to listen to this and be like, wow, Rod's really into sex work studying and and cybersecurity, and there's a whole other side to Rod. I didn't know all this.
Yeah, man.
That's
Yeah.
great. No, that's great.
Really weird.
We're multifaceted, so that's good. That's good. um okay, so let's switch gears here.
Mhm.
um I know you were preparing a little bit for this, so
A little. I think I've forgotten it all, but it'll come to me. That's fine.
okay.
And
Let's
thanks
talk
for letting me talk about my real life career.
your day job. Of course, man. I mean, you can talk about whatever you want.
Mhm.
I like this space to, um, productively, but for people to, talk about anything they want, but then to also try out ideas. It's fine if we get things wrong or we're not sure, and you just kind of talk out loud. It's okay. Obviously people will hear it, but I think it's one of those things where it's we're all in process. We're all going to think one thing one day and then, maybe change it another day. And I think sometimes, there's a nice privilege of being allowed into someone's, process of trying to think out loud of sorts about, tough issues or issues that don't get talked about enough. So of course, I mean, I enjoy hearing about it. I mean, I learned a bunch of things.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay. So, um, people have, uh, a wide variety of opinions, strong opinions on race, and this is something it's always sometimes it's in front and center in our culture. Sometimes it's kind of takes a backseat, but it's always there. There's always those conversations, and I think over the past call it 5 years, over the past 5 years, there has been a resurgence of people talking more about this, studying race more so in promoting that in kind of pop culture, if you will. And so now there's currently a movement. I guess you don't want to call it that, but there's a way of thinking about race relations, and it's called critical race theory. So tell us, Rod, what is critical race theory in your opinion? How do
Oh,
you?
thank you. In my opinion, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. Well, let's set the table here.
Uh-huh.
What? How do you understand it in general? Right. So when people
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
that, it's a loaded term now. But how do you? How do I think? What's your reading of the general idea, and then what's your specific reading of it, if you can?
Okay. All right. Well, the general idea of the public
Hmm.
is, in my sense, that they see it as this kind of, well, negative is a light way of saying it, but this sort of divisive set of ideas coming from academia, where the main idea is that America is endemically racist,
Hmm.
and that white people are congenitally racist. Maybe they're,
Hmm.
it's never the fact that white people are genetically racist, but that's what the people often say
Hmm.
online, I believe. But that's the perception, and so it seems, I think a lot of people, even though they don't express it this way,
Hmm.
I think that a lot of people are more concerned about it being accusatory
Hmm.
first, right? And then they kind of double back and say, okay, these people are accusing me of being racist, or they're saying that my nation is racist. And so now I have to come back and figure out how they came to these ideas, because obviously these ideas are wrong. And that starts this kind of cycle. So you got the America is racist, you got white people are racist, just
Hmm.
in an accusatory tone. So white, 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 white. So
Hmm.
people are like, what's the
Hmm.
white supremacy, this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, you've got this revisionist history kind of thing, um, which the first time I heard that actually was for a great podcast that I will plug. It's called Revisionist History. It's out of UVA. It's
Okay.
two historians. I mean, it's great.
Hmm.
It's not racial at all. I don't think these people are critical theorists. They just understand that facts don't speak for themselves, and so you have to go back and understand facts and
Hmm.
historical facts. So anyway,
Hmm.
so that revisionist history thing is a problem too, because you know I go to Thanksgiving dinner and I'm happy, and the pilgrims ate with the natives, and everything's wonderful, and then here comes this critical race theory come along saying, no, you slaughtered those people, you're bad, Thanksgiving sucks, this
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
people get upset about it.
Hmm.
That comes first, I believe.
But from the perspective of people that are promoting critical race theory, and again, kind of this general sense, I think the most, well, I think it's a charitable view. I think the idea, I mean, you tell me what you think, but look, we have a big problem of racism in the United States that claims, or not even claims, it is, look, our founding was built on the backs of slaves, and how we built our country, um, and and all throughout history up until the current time, there is this kind of racism that's endogenous to the systems, and then the people that inhabit the systems and have inhabited. I mean, we've always been fighting somebody else. We've had a civil war because of slavery. We, committed genocide to natives. All the rest. That's who we are, and so everything that is, or most things, I guess you could say, in American society are a product of that. And so white folks are racist, systems are racist, America is racist, it's the supremacy of white. I mean, that's the argument. That's how I hear the argument. I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but and
Yeah.
so because of that, we need to have more inclusion, we need to have more equality, we need to have equity, um, to have the nation that is, uh, life, pursuit of happiness, and liberty. That's kind of my 30-second reading of it, but maybe.
No, that's it. I mean, America is born in the blood of racism, and it still affects us to this day. And so we need to do something about it.
Mhm.
Critical race theory started in legal studies. So one of the things, if ever people in the IDW get to talk to either critical theorists or critical race theorists or something,
The intellectual dark web is
the
what you're
intellectual
referencing.
dark web,
Yeah, it's this term of I guess it's a couple years old now, of people, just for listeners that might not know it, is people of certain thinkers on different sides of the political spectrum that are sort of mavericks or have some heterodox thinking. This would be, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris,
Rogan, Weinstein
Weinstein. Yeah,
brothers,
right.
even Lowry and McWhorter, those kind of people.
Yeah, so these guys that they don't really fit neatly into a conservative liberal box, and they'll kind of cross lines on certain issues, and they're sort of heterodox in how they're thinking. So you were saying for these folks in the IDW, kind of a colloquial term for it, you were saying that they kind of are somewhat resistant to this general idea of critical race theory.
Well, I don't know if they're resistant. I'm thinking that
Okay.
if they ever got to the point where they could find someone who'd be willing to talk for like a 2.5 hour show on Rogan or something like that, or 3 hours, they would find that there's a lot of complexity there, and it's not as simple as even you and I are talking about.
Sure.
I think so. With the critical race theory thing, it comes out of legal studies, and so even the people who we're talking about now, D'Angelo, Kendi, and all these people who are the ones who get all the press,
right?
Maybe they see themselves as critical theorists. I know they're critical, but I don't know if they would identify that way. I guess so. Maybe D'Angelo does more than Kendi. I'm not sure, but they're not coming from that tradition where you've got these scholars who are generally non-white, who are looking at actual disparities and saying, how has the law impacted people differently and created these disparities? The laws are built through racist eyes, maybe is a good way of saying it. And so we need to change and not take into account the experiences of people of color. And so therefore we need to go back and change those laws and policies to reduce the racial inequality. That's a very rational starting point, I think. Now, over time, though, these ideas moved out strictly. And by the way, for your listeners, if someone wants to um, go and look up a prominent critical race theorist, probably the one who gets the most TV time would be Ian Haney Lopez.
I've heard the name.
I think he's at UCLA, but I'm not sure. But he's on TV a lot. He's really good. I have a couple of his books. But then the person who probably writes the most accessible entry point to critical race theory would be Richard Delgado. He's up in age now. I think he's 81. He's at University of Alabama. But anyway, if you read, especially Delgado's book, and he explains sort of the basic, it's almost written for like a first year undergrad. It'll give you a different view from what you're seeing on TV about critical race theory. It's actually quite logical. You may not agree with the assumptions about race and policy and all that stuff, but given the assumptions that they start with, you certainly do come to a conclusion that, okay, right, we need to change the laws. History was written by people who were the dominant people and they see things through their own view. So therefore we need to go back and look at how minorities see things because that will then change things. So that doesn't mean you'd agree with it. It just would mean that if more discussions were had in a long form, you would sort of humanize and add more granularity to what people think about critical race theory.
How is some of these people you've just listed and kind of the origins of where the theory starts? How does that differ from kind of what's in mainstream with? I wouldn't maybe put Coates in that, but I would, definitely, Kendi, D'Angelo, and those are the main people at the moment. There's obviously other people. What's, I guess, in your mind, your reading of it, the biggest differences between some of the folks you just mentioned, kind of these people that start out, writing these books, Delgado and the other person you mentioned, from the people that are more mainstream at the moment? Is there a difference? Is it the same? How is it different, I guess?
Well, I guess it's a difference. It's a distinction without a difference. Maybe is that the phrase that we use? So it is certainly the case if you are going through UCLA and you decide to take the critical track, then uh, I would say UCLA Law School, and you take the critical track, and there are a couple of prominent scholars there. Then what you're going to do is you're going to focus your analysis on legal documents, and you're going to understand racial inequality through the differential impacts of law.
Okay.
That's a straightforward thing.
Okay.
Okay. Well, the assumptions within critical race theory, this idea that different groups have different perspectives, and that's really important. So some people imagine, and I certainly did for a while, that if the Supreme Court says something, this is the best interpretation that we have. Right? This is what the Constitution meant because these people are learned and they said it. Right? Another interpretation is, look, these people grew up in a certain time with a certain viewpoint, and so they passed a certain law. But hey, these are old white men. Maybe if you had 6 black men on the Supreme Court, they would have come to a different decision. So there's no universals here. It's all relative. So that's the kind of idea that bubbles up there. Well, that can be exported to other disciplines.
Okay.
In fact, even though I've started with CRT, the broad thing is just thinking critically. So Kendi is a historian. He got his PhD at Temple University in African American history. You can think critically there. You can say, hey, I used Thanksgiving earlier, so I'll use something else. Okay, Lincoln freed the slaves. This is a great man. Gettysburg Address. 4 score and 7. And then someone can come along and say, but he only did that because he was trying to curry favor with certain people, and by freeing the slaves, this meant that this would cause some problems for people in the South, and there's some other people in the North who supported him. So therefore, it wasn't really about black folk. It was really about winning the war. So you can go back and make that kind of analysis.
That
right?
was Frederick Douglass' kind of argument, actually, for a
Oh,
while.
really?
Yeah, I mean, he had harsh criticisms about Lincoln. Even
You're a critical theorist.
even when they were um, making the statue in D.C. I think like maybe 5 or so years after he died, Douglas went and gave the speech, and the first half of the speech, he's just kind of very critical of Lincoln, saying, he was a president for white men first. He wasn't for us, and maybe kind of there was some pragmatic way of freeing us so that way we could win the war. He kind of makes that argument, and then he gives the second half of the speech where he says like all the positive things about him, right? So he had some kind of balance, and his narrative and history in life is fascinating too. But there are people that do make that argument though, and he did make some aspects of that argument as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you accept that assumption, then all these other things necessarily follow. It's the same with social social construction, I guess, would be one. But even just sociologists in general think that our world is kind of made through symbols and stuff. So that's not really a groundbreaking thing. I think one thing that matters, though, that all critical scholars sort of embrace, both in the CRT field, but just CT in general, is that racism or any of those isms are endemic. It's not just about, oh, you know what, we passed the civil rights bill, and so now everyone can eat at the same table, or we passed this bill, and so women can work. No. It's endemic in our everyday lives, and D'Angelo really makes a big deal about this. Like, no matter what you do, being born in the United States, you're socialized into thinking a certain way, and so that's going to impact how you deal with people. And so trying to get out of that is kind of difficult, and that actually really pisses people off, I think, because they don't want to.
Yes, because it's I think the um, the pushback for it that many people have is it's saying you're telling me something about myself that I can't control, and that is one of the worst things that you could possibly, be called, which is racist. And so you're telling me I can't, not that you can't change it, I guess, but that to be who you are, to be white or to be a white American is to be racist. So you're identifying people, um, again, to with D'Angelo and I guess a little bit of Kendi as well, to say, hey, to be you or a part of you is to be racist in some ways. That's, I think, why there's strong pushback on that.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Um, well, I guess if I could kind of push back a bit, I think that the way that she tries to describe this is not to think in terms of moral things.
Mhm.
It's not immoral to have these views about black and white folk. It's just human. I
Mhm.
think that's the idea. Um, Whether or not she was able to get that message out properly, I don't know. Certainly, when I teach my race and ethnicity class, on occasion when I get to teach it,
Mhm.
I do start by saying that as Americans, we're kind of socialized into seeing the world a certain way, and it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just how we are, and to ignore that is going to ignore some important phenomena that goes on.
Mhm.
So, I mean, but you're absolutely right. Yes, I mean, who wants to think that their identity is being demeaned? I guess. I mean, especially since we pride ourselves on seeing everyone as individuals
Well,
and treating everyone fairly.
I think it's more again, some of the the pushback that I hear from people is you're telling me about something I can't ever, I can't change that happened, or that's how I am in some ways, or um that it's something about me, right? You're it's not, I think the claim is you're stripping people of autonomy and empowerment from themselves, because you're saying there's nothing I can do about that. I mean, to be white is to be racist because of all the things that you just said in terms of explaining the theory of you're born into a system, you're born into a country that is that. And so because of that, you also are there. And so I think the pushback from people is it's more of you're telling me that you're taking some type of freedom or empowerment that I have to say, no, I'm not racist. I'm yes, I'm white, but I'm not racist. Like that can't be the same. And I think that's hard for people because it's always um, it's something you can't really get out of, right? It's just it is sort of a maxim of like this is it or it isn't. It is a kind of black and white thing, and people push back against that argument.
Yeah, I see that. I think I mean one of my critiques is
See, I was
don't
going to
worry
say,
about.
what's your version of this, right? So we're
Yeah.
kind of saying in a general sense how it is, but you said that you had a different view of it. So what's your view of this
Wait, different view of.
on the critical race theory? You had said that there was we were talking about the general way and how it's received, and then you said you see it a little different, unless I misheard that.
Oh no, I think I got lost somewhere in the. I think I lost the plot with that. I mean, I did
Okay.
start with the with the general thing. I think when I started talking about it being in the legal field and the assumptions that is also my view. You know,
Okay, so
so,
so
so,
you
so
take it from more of the technical aspects of starting with the legal field and all the rest, but you also are at the least sympathetic to how it is in pop culture at the moment, and you agree with those positions as well, or you have critiques.
okay, yeah. Well, if we move to the political stuff, I think that on balance, it would be better if we continue along the current social justice path of
Mhm.
identifying the needs of minority groups and putting things in practice
Mhm.
uh, that would address their needs. So, in some ways, this is coming out of a critical framework. I mean, it's one thing to pass laws that protect minorities and give everyone equal rights,
Mhm.
but if uh, race and gender and all these things are embedded in our society, so the isms are embedded in our society, then we have to continuously make sure that we put things in place to deal with that.
Mhm.
So yeah, I am sympathetic to maybe not everything in CRT or CT and all that stuff, but just a general thrust towards identifying needs of minorities. Absolutely.
Okay, so what would you say a little bit of your I guess I'll start with the positive, I guess, in some ways. In your view, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you tell me, but in your view, it's this if the goal is how do we have um, definitely minority groups or disenfranchised groups have an equal seat at the table, right? With white folk, with other people. How do we do that? And you're positing that the best way or a very good way would be to follow what critical race theory espouses, what social justice folks are very concerned about, which is typically uh, equality and equity. Maybe we could, in a minute, describe the differences between those two, and then also having more representation across the board in all fields where everybody is represented somewhat equally or close to equally, and that we are more inclusive of more and more different types of folks, and doing that by changing complete systems and in this country, in education, in all the things, right, in business, and just changing systems in all of the domains of kind of life. Is that about right, or am I totally getting it wrong?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, that sounds fine. There are always ways of modifying a word or two here and there, but the general thrust, sure. Yes, absolutely. I think that given what I know from looking at the evidence,
Mhm.
um, racism is still impactful in the lives of people of color. I don't know as much about sexual minorities and women,
Mhm.
so I can't say. But certainly with people of color, yes. And if you can come up with ways of dealing with those issues, then over time you should be able to decouple skin color from social outcome, and that will then lead to people not being able to make prejudgments and stereotype. Like that's kind of the idea.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, I'm all for it. You know, if you so the pejorative is woke. So if I have to put on that cloak,
Mhm.
fine. You know, I'm
Mhm.
I'm okay with it. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. Um, so just let me refine this a little bit. So
hmm
the goal is what for you? For Rod and how he sees and reads this in society, the goal is what? What is it for you with doing all this?
The goal would be to have. It's a good question. To have people of color, especially those who have experienced, because it's important. Okay, let me back up a bit. I think it's important to say this because
Okay.
I'm using people of color here, but racial groups have different trajectories and histories in our society. Black folk tend to be a stand in for all people of color. I make that mistake, and a lot of people do. And maybe that's not the best way forward because Asian Americans come with a different history, and so they may not need the same types of programs as Hispanics would, who came as immigrants, low skilled immigrants mainly, whereas Asians came high skilled immigrants. That's completely different. Of course, Black folk were non voluntary immigrants, as were Indians. So
Hmm.
all or Native Americans.
Hmm.
So all of these things, change how we understand it. But in general,
Hmm.
the idea would be to have these groups, people of color, to maybe take the same trajectory that Irish, Italian, Polish, German immigrants did, where they chose to assimilate or not, but all of them chose to assimilate, and
Hmm.
their particular outcomes were so similar to the native population until it was meaningless to talk about someone who's German
Hmm.
uh, or Polish. People can obviously say I'm Polish, but no one is
Hmm.
like, oh, that means something about you. It doesn't mean that much in the U.S. And so that's the ultimate goal.
Hmm.
It's also so one goal is that, right? But there's another goal, I think, of a kind of moral one. It's like people who I know personally have been mistreated
Hmm.
by our government, even
Hmm.
by people, but I don't really care about people that much. I care about people in a general sense, but not in terms of racism.
Hmm.
So, but I care about but how our government has mistreated them.
Hmm.
Our policies have gone in one direction over the other, helping some people, helping others. And so that's still a part of our society. And so, in a moral sense, I think that there are some wrongs that need to be righted, right? So that's also a part of it.
Okay. I mean, let's stay with that for a minute. What, how are you making the distinction between, I think the first part of what you're saying is some version of, you were talking kind of about equity, basically, that if, while you were talking, I was thinking if we have a white boy, let's say, that's,
Mhm.
you know, 10 years old, and you have a black boy who's 10 years old, that the goal is they both could have the same outcome when they get older. They're
The
not
outcome is not related to their skin color. Yeah.
right. So you are promoting a future through all of this work, um, that is colorblind. I know that's a loaded word, but
All right.
that but
Yeah.
that is that somewhere where it's like that doesn't matter anymore. That we have gotten so good at this. We don't see that. We don't need that. If you're black, if you're Latin, if you're Asian, if you're white, you all can have more or less a very similar outcome. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. Is that
That's right.
right?
That's right.
Okay.
Right. It's
Okay.
important to know that it's not. So all this is based on some assumptions, I think. So I assume that there is no uh, genetic difference in the population of Hispanics between the population of Asians, whites, uh, Hispanics, blacks. So the thing that's preventing equal success and failure
Hmm.
are the different environments they're operating in.
Hmm.
So black folk are operating or navigating, I like to say that sounds cooler. So they're navigating an environment where, okay, it's a segregated neighborhood. They're isolated from resources in many ways. It's not just a neighborhood, but when, for historical reasons, jobs, wealth, connections, social capital, economic capital, these things are
Hmm.
clustered in white friendship networks,
Hmm.
and there's anti-black bias that prevents black folk from entering into those networks, or just they just feel they don't want to enter, so it doesn't have to always be about white folks. But the
Hmm.
fact is that black and white, while it's changing, there's still a lot of segregation. Okay, so that's a problem,
Hmm.
and that ends up preventing those black folk from doing as well. uh, I mean, that's just one example. It's also I mean, it's like what would be another? I'm trying to skip around racial groups so I don't just focus. Even though I'm a black dude, I'm trying to talk about different groups here.
It's okay. You could
Uh,
talk about black folk. It's fine.
yeah, it's
I guess
equal
my question
opportunity. You
is
know, be
my
the change.
my question is on that is why do you make that assumption? I guess for you, why is that the assumption that you make about? Well, I don't see that there's maybe genetic differences between black folk or other groups. I see it more as a social environment. Okay, but why is that the assumption that you're kind of coming to the table with?
Well, you only have you have what, three options? You've got social causes that cause differences in populations, not individuals. Individuals can just be screwy or geniuses. You can't look at the individual, but at a population level, you got three options. In general, you got a genetic option, you've got a cultural option, and then you've got an environmental option. The thing about the genetic option is, I'm not an expert in that, but from what I understand, is that there are no major genetic differences between ancestral populations, is the words that they use now. And so, yeah, there might be some minor differences, but nothing that would lead to the vast differences in social outcomes, right? So I don't even consider that. So then you've got the conservative culture argument and then the progressive structure argument. Here's the thing. If you look outside of politics and you talk to any scholar, uh, they'll tell you that throughout human history, it's always environment that leads to population cultural changes. In other words, people respond to their environment. They would be stupid not to. So if they're so it could be, of course, that there's a new technology that enters into society. They have to change, and over time they change. It could be that there's some massive war or something, and there's a political change, uh, the Russian Revolution or something, and then people have to respond to it. Whatever. But those changes at some level then lead to cultural changes. Okay. Since Black and white folk operate the same environment, they should anyway, they should have similar outcomes because the environment should have been the same. They're in the same society. Unfortunately, that is not what has happened. Black folk have been segregated over time.
Right.
And not only that, the laws have been, at least historically, have benefited white folks over Black folks. I give the example of the Homestead Act, and I don't remember what year that was, but it was the act to sort of help settle the West.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fine. That was a de facto white kind of affirmative action type thing, you know.
Yes.
So the people who went out, and maybe some historian can watch or listen to this and correct me, but as far as I understand it, the people who settled the Midwest and Texas and the West were from all types of ethnic backgrounds. The class may have been the same, middle and poor, but there are all types of ethnic backgrounds with different cultures. However, that policy in the environment of the West that necessitated a certain type of way of being.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of toughness, you know, independence that goes with being in the West.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, of course, because Irish people are not stupid. They over time adapt to their environment. Italian people are not stupid. They adapt.
Right.
So of course they're going to have the same culture over time. It's fine to make a cultural argument for a one generation.
Mm-hmm.
You can say that with Asians coming in, but unless those Asians are intentionally segregating or forcefully segregating, they will eventually, or they should, have the same culture as the majority population.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, whatever benefits they get from being middle class in Korea coming here, they should lose over time. And I think that's what happens over time with assimilation. So that's why I don't really buy the cultural argument for broad changes. So that just leaves structure. The policies, the environment they live in, the school, the institutions, how other people see them, all of those things is what produces the differences. That doesn't mean, though, I see you're about to say something, but it doesn't mean, though, that culture doesn't matter. It just matters for an individual, maybe a small unit, because they may have the resources to leverage that culture. It's kind of like, look, Americans are fatter now than ever before. You can't put that on culture. It's because of, you know, high fructose corn syrup. We're sitting on all day, you know, this kind of stuff. But if I hire a personal trainer for my fat buddy, maybe on the inside, I shouldn't say it like that. I've actually gained like 10 pounds over in the
So
pandemic.
everyone's gained some weight over the past 9 months sitting at home.
So I shouldn't say that. So in other words, if I had a trainer for me, I'll put it that way.
Right.
And I have the particular disposition to take advantage of that trainer, sure, at an individual level. But if you really want America to be skinnier, you got to make some broad cultural changes, you know? I mean, or structural changes, excuse me. So,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah.
So okay. So we've kind of charted out, I guess, the kind of what critical race theory is. We've talked about race and a little bit of racism in general. And you were telling me about the goal and how you want to see things done and how you want things to be achieved. So I think all of that somewhat tracks. I think even conservatives listening to this at this point would probably, I think, in the general aspect, probably agree with you in terms of the goal. In terms of the goal. I think so. Even all the people that are so hateful about critical race theory and all that stuff, I think they would say, yes, that's right. We want to make sure, at least, that they would change it a little bit probably and say, look, you know, I also want the color of someone's skin to be not as relevant as it is now. I would love for people to have very similar opportunities and that they could have potentially similar outcomes.
Mm.
I don't think a lot of people, maybe this is my optimism or I'm too Pollyannish, but I think most people would say goal wise or ideally, yes, that's what America's about. That's what it should be about.
Mhm.
So here's where I think it breaks down.
Okay.
Okay. So I think where it breaks down is how that's done. And I think that's important. And my thing about this is I have a little bit of a different approach is if people want to do, and this is where it becomes really difficult. If people want to do some version of what you had just said, fine. Cities want to do that. Maybe some states want to do that. Fine. I'm kind of buy into this kind of liberal pluralism, right? It's like we have to be able to hold different people doing slightly different things, and it's not this one size fits all. I think where that breaks down with critical race theory is it is pretty absolutist, right? In this, like, it has to be across the board or it doesn't work. And then that's where the other side comes in. They say, no, we're not doing any of that. That's not, it's just, I totally disagree with doing it that way or whatever. But at the same time, both people are claiming, but we have the same goal. We all want the same thing, in a sense. So for you, let's talk a little specific, right? Because I've seen you post this online and stuff like that. You like Ibram X Kendi.
I
Yeah.
like him. Oh, sure, sure. Some of
Yes, you
his
like him?
writing I find very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and uh he's not a controversial figure. I wouldn't say that, but he's definitely uh he has people have strong opinions about him one way or the other. What is it about his approach, let's say, that is, and I'm using him as an example because he's on Oprah's show and he's doing all these talks and he's done a TED talk and he's just everywhere. He's saturated himself everywhere. And he has his critics, of course.
You've answered your question already.
Okay, go ahead. Well, how did I answer it?
That's it. It's only his popularity. He's become like a poster boy for critical race theory, even though he's got nothing to do with critical race theory.
Okay, so tease that out for me. Tease it out.
I mean,
Educate me.
he's a
Educate me.
critical. He's coming from that school of thought, definitely. So I mean, you could say that he critiques the system, but
I mean, he's telling me we got to be racist or anti-racist. I mean, that's what he's telling us.
that's true. But I think if he had not sold 1 million books, it would have been just a kind of like, oh wow, that's interesting. I don't agree, and people would have forgotten about it. But because he sold so much and he became so popular, and he's everywhere, as you mentioned, he's become something of a poster boy for. It's the same thing happened with D'Angelo. Uh, they become these kind of people who get all the ire from critical race theory and woke culture, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't know if it's deserved or not. I can tell you, I have no interest theoretically in racist, anti-racist. I find it something that is good for me personally. It helps me think about what I'm doing. And I like the book because I think I mentioned it with you online. A lot of the things that on Twitter, a lot of the things that he talks about in his life, I experienced. He's only I shouldn't say only, I guess he's 8 years younger than me or something like that. Everything from going to the HBCU and going through some kind of colorism, finding only light-skinned women attractive and thinking that only authentic black folk live in ghettos, this kind of ridiculous way of thinking. I did that same thing. So it's meaningful to me. But as a historian, he's seeing things in ways that me as a sociologist probably wouldn't see, and I don't really think about it that much. So
okay. But I'll come back to that in a minute because I did want to ask you something about that. But so you're saying he's become this poster boy for this, but so how is it for many people? How would you see it as different? I guess. like he's not espousing, critical race theory, or he is, or I get the sense that you're saying that he's kind of become that, but he's not really that, or something like that.
I don't think so. I mean, he is a scholar who thinks critically about society,
Mm-hmm.
and he does it from a historical lens, and he's interested in race. So his first book, the one that got him really going, not his first book, the second book, Stand from the
Stand from the
Beginning.
beginning. Yeah, yeah.
Now I listened to that one
Mm-hmm.
twice actually because it's a very long book, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I don't retain things by listening. I
Mm-hmm.
found it to be very impressive. It won the National Book Award,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's the thing that got him going. He had
Mm-hmm.
written a book before
Right.
then, I think, but this is the one that got him going.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so to me, he was just okay. This is a critical scholar who's sort of revising our understanding of racist ideas throughout history.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was fine. I thought it was nice. I didn't see him as critical race theory. It technically he can't be. I mean, it's not like he's looking through. I don't know. I mean, he's looking through policy, but he's not trying. He's not looking specifically at laws and um, and taking that kind of legal scholar approach. So he's not that, but he would be a critical scholar. I really think that the critical race theory thing is a big hullabaloo. Like it's not. People should have concerns about research that's not really that rigorous coming from critical scholars. The problem is they're misattributing it. They're saying that okay, all of this is critical race theory, all this is critical race theory, and then when you go and you go to Wikipedia and you look up scholars
Yeah.
who are critical, and you go, well, gosh, I don't see Kendi here, I don't see D'Angelo here, I don't see any of these things here. It's just I don't know how to explain it. It's really amazing how this has happened. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting off track a little bit. So yeah, I think he's critical. I don't think he's a critical race theorist in that way at all. I think Racist, Anti-Racist is a nice self-help book in many ways for me, but I wouldn't go out and say, man, this is so theoretically sound that we should really use it to impact policy. I would not do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the thing about, so I'll start with Coates a little bit, because I know Ta-Nehisi Coates is still a pretty, uh, he's not as talked about anymore as he was, 4 or 5 years ago, but
Mhm.
he's still kind of around. I think the thing for him, I didn't see a lot of, I didn't see, I guess, as much pushback as I see with Kendi at the moment from a lot of people. I mean, Coates had his critics, but the thing with Coates was that, I mean, I kind of just took him for what he was trying to do. I mean, he's just telling his story. I mean, that's really what it was. He's just telling a narrative. He's telling a narrative of sorts about his experience of, growing up black, or in the black community, or somewhat of black culture. And that was about it. I mean, it was like in my view, I mean, that's how I read it. And, my criticism of him was, I thought he was cynical. Like, I thought it was like, sure, you can see the world that way. And maybe if you are a Black American, you would see the world that way. I mean, he's from at least Baltimore, West Baltimore. I'm not sure if he's from West Baltimore specifically, but he's from, tough side of Baltimore, out in PG County, which is where I grew up in Maryland. So, I mean, I loosely familiar. I mean, I didn't grow up in the Black community, but, he, um, he had a very particular take, and it's like, okay, that's his experience. And I don't, when I read it, I've read it twice. I wasn't like trying to, you know, diminish that or say like that didn't happen to him or he shouldn't have written that. I thought the perspective was overwhelmingly cynical, but okay. I mean, that was his experience. Maybe there's some kind of catharsis for him. I didn't like what he kind of did this thing intentionally or unintentionally where it felt like he was kind of speaking for all Black people for a little bit. I don't like when people usually do that. Maybe he wasn't trying to. It kind of felt that way though a little bit. With Kendi, I've read his books twice. I've read Stand from the Beginning, and anytime I read anything, I read everything, right? I'm reading all the time. So, and I read people I'm probably not going to agree with, or maybe I will. But every time I pick up a book, I'm like, okay, I've heard a lot of things about this, or maybe I haven't heard anything. Let me just try and shut all that off and just read it for what it is, and just try and get the best version of this person and hear their arguments as if, I was them and how they would try and make this argument. Like, that's kind of how I read things. And Stanford from the beginning was fine. I didn't agree with it, but I saw it. I was like, okay, he's a guy that has a PhD in African American studies. He's telling history in this way. Sure, you can do that. And I thought the perspective was interesting. With the newer book, I guess it's not new anymore. It's been around for like 2 years or so. It did feel somewhat prescriptive, right? According to Kendi, I'm a racist. That's just it.
Wait, in that book. So okay, I did listen to it. So I think you know more about, you retain more when you read than when you listen. So you
Maybe.
have a bit. But I don't recall. Maybe it wasn't even about white folks at all, or white Hispanic folks at all. It was just about him. I saw.
So yes, I think the strong parts of his book, that book in particular, was what you had said. Mm-hmm. His experiences, certain stereotypes he would believe, how he would grow up. He does a nice job, and he writes well. I mean, he does a nice job of explaining his experience within the Black community, his progression, for sure. And I think those are probably the best parts of the book. There are parts in the beginning, parts a little bit in the middle, and definitely at the end. Yeah, I mean, in the beginning specifically, I can remember he makes kind of his thesis, which is, I want to tell people, so his story parts are kind of interwoven into how he's trying to make his thesis, which is, it's not enough to be not racist. Mm-hmm. We need to be anti-racist. And if you are not, then you are racist.
I see.
And he's making this dichotomy of, it is just a black and white thing for him. It is this or it is this. And so, I'm reading his argument. I'm like, okay, that's a strong claim. So then, so I read the whole thing and I'm like, yeah, by his definition, I'm totally a racist. 100%. 100%. Because I don't agree with the way he sees it.
Just embrace it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it is. And to me, that this is the thing with Kendi that I have a problem with is, okay, one, I don't think that's makes sense. I mean, I can get the logic behind it. But the second thing is, I don't see how that's helpful in trying to do some of the goals you want to do by literally putting people into two camps. Take out the race thing for a minute. Mm-hmm. I don't see how you go around with your thesis saying you are anti-racist or you are racist. And it is not enough to not be racist or to not say anything or to not want to have all of these changes and to do all of the things in the way that he is prescribing it. I mean, he makes that very clear. You cannot just sit on the fence here. He's very explicit with that. So this could be white people, this could be black people, this could be Latin people. And in that sense, I'm like, how, whether it's true or not, right? Let's leave that on the table for a minute. I just don't see how that's helpful with conversation with people all around this country, whatever race they may be, but definitely for white people, of this guy going around calling people racist. I just don't see how does that.
It's the same thing with D'Angelo. I agree with you. I think that it's not practical. It's not pragmatic. You're not going to get. It's not. No one. Most people are not going to be happy with that. There are some people. Right. There are some white liberals who are like, okay, it's cool. Right. I want to be anti-racist, but yeah, probably middle America is like, what are you talking about, dude? I don't like this. So yeah.
I don't think it goes even that far to middle America. I mean, I think it's more of just, I don't like, I mean, we've talked about this before a little bit. I think people are really complicated and people are really messy. And I think trying to put people in 2 boxes or 3 boxes or 1 box is, you can do that, but you're missing a lot of the person, right? Like, for example, how did we start this conversation? I had no idea you were like,
You didn't
deep
know I was into sex,
sex
did you?
work. Yeah, I didn't know you were into the cyber element. Like, there's just all these things. If I had my bearings about me, I'd be like, look, Rod's a sociologist. He studies a lot of things down there in Norfolk, and he's really talking about race issues often. He's passionate about it, and that's about it. But that's not true. I mean, there's the personal side of you, there's the professional side of you, there's within your profession all of the things you're doing. And that's true, I think, of everybody. And like, I just don't know how distilling folks into this reductionistic, absolutist categorization, A, if it's true, or B, if it's helpful, I think, for a lot of people. Um, and then I think, so this is, I think, where a lot of people get really upset and really exercise about it is, okay, well, now we're going to take Kendi's model. So let's be, and this might dive into the next thing I wanted to hit with you on this is, he's not saying explicitly he wants to do policy or all of these things. But the fact remains is that many businesses and trainings have made this part of their compliance program. Many schools are making Kendi stuff part of their social curriculums. There's a lot of things where this guy wrote this book 2 years ago, and they're swallowing it whole, and they're informing and teaching and prescribing. Okay, here's how you do diversity trainings. Here's how you do social programs for certain people in certain education systems. Let's take it from this guy that wrote a book 2 years ago that, he is not claiming to promote that, but he's definitely not saying, no, 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 don't use it that way. He's still promoting it. He's, making money. Good for him. And I think that's where people have a problem with it. It's like, okay, wait a minute. Number one, you're calling half the country or more than half the country racist because they don't agree with his definition of non-racism or anti-racism. And then we're going to have, not that he's trying to do it necessarily, but he's definitely not saying, no, look, that's not how this is supposed to be. Let's go and just train all these people to use something that way. I think if you take that out of with anything else, most people would have pushback on that.
Yeah, I come from the school of thought where it's not about. First off, he talks a lot about policies. No. He does more about ideas. In his books, he talks about the ideas. Sometimes when he's in public, he talks now a lot about racist policies or something. But I'm not. But in any case, I come from the school of thought that changing people's minds about things is not the way to go. It's just not. I mean, people have. First off, you're right about them being complex, and I was not aware of diversity trainings based on Kendi. I didn't know that, but if that is the case, people will be resistant to that, most definitely. And I'm from the school of thought that let people believe what they believe, but I think that there needs to be some policy, like do things on a different level, and not really have this confrontational way. My reason for that, though, is probably something that a lot of people don't like. I think that people have ideas that they hold ideas that are in their best interest. So, which is going probably not where you would probably go with this idea,
Go ahead.
but I think that if I come up to someone and say, "Look, we need to institute this particular, or you need to think about how you are racist towards Black folk." So let's give an example from Kendi's book where he talks about space racism. I think that's what he called,
Yeah.
where we associate black spaces as being less than, which I have done. It's one of the nice things about this book is I can see it. Yes, if I moved to, when we moved to Norfolk, even though I didn't say it out loud, implicitly I was thinking, and I know my wife was thinking, she's Korean, she's incredibly racist if we use Kendi's definition. Um, let's look for where the white folks live. That's basically what we did, right? And so if I go to someone and I'm doing diversity training and I say, look, this is probably what you're doing. There's no benefit in changing your mind on that. Why? It's not going to help you at all. You're happy with the way you're thinking. It's not like you're going to move into a black neighborhood. So you're going to resist this idea that you're being racist. And you're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Everything's fine. I just want to live where the property values are high or something like that. So to me, trying to talk to people about this is kind of stupid. It's the same thing with D'Angelo and the whiteness idea. Like, just leave it alone. Keep that in academia, because trying to explain, okay, this is what whiteness means. Actually, a good idea is white privilege. I can tell you that empirically, it holds. On average, if you equalize for everything, whiteness gives you a bump. So if you're poor and a drug addict, if you're a white poor drug addict, you have a better outcome than if you're a black poor drug addict. So there is a kind of privilege there. Why tell people that? They don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that people that they got something for being white. So just leave it alone. Keep that in academia. We can use that to analyze things and as a kind of theoretical thing. Just forget about it. So to kind of come back to, wow, I really said a lot in that little thing there. I talked about moving to Norfolk and being racist and white privilege and drug addicts. I went all over the place with that. But anyway, the idea is that, you're not getting anything. So eventually I agree with you. You're not getting anything by doing that. Yeah.
I just don't think that people necessarily are thinking about that. I think most people, when they think about moving someplace, what makes sense for them and their family and their wallet. I can afford this place. And usually it's school systems too, which there could be some, I could definitely see some influence on some of the systematic things there. But I think most people are typically have a different set of priorities. Again, maybe I'm a little more naive. Maybe there are people that are like, no, we're not moving there, but they are moving there. But then I also think, well, what's a black community, right? Black communities don't always equal low SES poor, right? It doesn't always, or high crime. I mean, if you go out to Prince George's County over here where I'm at, I don't live in PG, but it's in my state. I mean, there's plenty of cities where there are affluent African Americans.
I think that's the wealthiest majority African district in the country. No, I agree with you. People are complex, and a lot of people are not thinking about race. In fact, to be a bit self-reflective here, it could be a matter of projection. Like I'm thinking, no, that probably would not work in this situation here. No. But it could be. I'm thinking that, okay, because I'm thinking about race so much, other people are thinking about race so much. And so I'm willing to believe the studies that show, or the writing that shows that people think about race so much. It could be, right? I mean, it's possible.
And I'm not saying that doesn't happen or that doesn't exist. I think it does. My point of view is I don't know. And so I'm kind of coming to every person or everything blank and saying, okay, sure. If I sit there and I start making all these assumptions but none of that could be true. Some of it could be true. All of it could be true. So let me try and come at it as, kind of sort of blank as I can. And so that way I'm not having to kind of deconstruct my prejudices. So I guess in that way, I said this before, I think the starting point for things is the individual, because I don't know what someone's perception, what they're thinking about, what animates them, I don't know what that is, and I don't know what that is about themselves, and I don't know what it is about me or how they perceive me. So, for example, when I've asked people, I don't even think about it, right? Sometimes, but I've in certain conversations it will come up. People will usually say, "Yeah, you're racially ambiguous. You're white, but you got something else in you." Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I already they can't put me in a box, right? They're just like, "I don't know where you go." But if you were to take something about, okay, let's say, I see you, you're an African American man.
I'm not ambiguous. I'm unambiguous.
You're unambiguous. You're a black man. It's dependent on what I know and what I think about black folk. Now that's coming from a lot of different things. But if I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
saying this is what black people are and what they do, I think that's wrong to do in either direction. If you're doing it from a some kind of racist or racial motivation, or if you're doing it in an, to use the term, anti-racist kind of motivation, right, where you're trying to say, wait a minute, let's think about people of color, let's think about minority groups. I think that's fine, you can do that, but at the end of the day, if you're missing the individuals or the individual, you don't know, because to be a certain way or to be a certain race or a certain ethnicity, those are generalities. That doesn't mean that it applies for each individual person. So if you're saying, okay, well, because of this and this and this and this, these things must be true, I think that that's losing the person. I don't think that you don't acknowledge those things. I don't think that you don't see that. I don't think that you shouldn't understand or be curious about how someone's race or ethnicity or culture or SES or background influences their core being or their individuality. But I think like I said to you before, to me, with a lot of the, um, I don't like the term, but the woke crowd, as I just think is a little backwards, is I think all the things they're worried about are important. It's just that's typically their starting point. And for me, the starting point is you have the individual and then you kind of branch outward. And that's where it gives you more of the elements of who they are. It gives you more of the like the supplementals. It gives you more. And like those things can be connected to the core of who you are. I'm not saying that. I'm saying trying to understand, okay, you know, what is it about this individual specifically? Now, some people don't have the time to do that, right? And you have to rely on shortcuts, mental shortcuts. But I think that attitude of doing that is appropriate. And I think, you know, if my assumption is Rod's black, so he has to like hip hop and rap, you could hate it. You could hate it. You might not even like it at all.
Mhm.
And you could casually say, that's pretty common for black folk to like that type of music, right? I'm using a stereotype. But maybe you hate it. Maybe you just like jazz and classical music and you can't stand rap whatsoever. And if I'm assuming that because of your race or because of your background or where you live, that's a wrong assumption about somebody. Now, it's a preference, right? At the end of the day, does it matter? Not really. But I think when you're using that heuristic to understand people, that gets you, that can get you in trouble because it's like, well, I don't, just because they're black or because they're a woman or because they're gay, I can't lean too heavily on the general kind of scaffolding that we know about those groups, because then I'm going to miss this individual person and they might not align with all those things. And
Interesting. I think we're talking on two different levels here. So
okay.
yes, when you're dealing, in fact, we know this actually. I mean, one of the strategies that people do to create that sort of seeing people as individuals and get out of the race, class, gender boxes is to create situations where people are constantly butting up against one another.
Hmm. Hmm.
Be that sharing dorm rooms or and however it may work. Even mixed income neighborhoods. The idea is
Hmm.
supposedly that that's going to
Hmm.
stop people from thinking that, oh, poor people this way, rich people this way, whatever.
Right.
Okay, so we know that works, but at the level of policy, you really have to think in terms of what are the general trends. It needs to be evidence based Um, but still, you can't. If you're someone who is interested in social justice,
Right.
and you're looking at uh, racial differences, you have to do it at a broad level. I mean, there's
So
just no way around it.
sure, and your finer point here is one of scale. We don't have the time to do all that, to institute change in policy for certain groups or certain places or communities.
Well, it's no way. I mean, if
Right.
you make a policy about smoking, we know that some people who take in secondhand smoke live, but you're not. You're just thinking about the class of people who may take in secondhand smoke, and you make a policy about that class,
Mm.
knowing that in general, the odds it's more likely that those people will be harmed. So it's just how policy works. That you have to do it by classes.
Yeah, yeah. I like that. I hear that. And so I guess for me, and I don't have an answer for this, is something I'll have to think about is how can we how can we capture the spirit of what we can do at the individual level and how we can maintain that when we scale it up to groups or classes of people. Um, I think that's challenging. That's
Yeah,
tough, but I
I'll leave it
think
to you, psychologists.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a hard one. So okay, that makes sense. All right, last thing, um, because I know
Oh, how long have we been going?
I
What
want
time is it?
to. It's
Eight 30.
about hour 40.
Okay. Mhm.
um, how I gotta ask, and maybe some of the stuff will tie together. All right, so for those of you who don't know, Rod wrote a piece on Medium a couple days ago on
Nice.
some incendiary statements, and he got some retweets, and he got some publicity, and people were getting all up in arms. And I'll be honest, there was a part of me, I'm looking at this, I'm like, is Rod just trolling us? Is he just trying to play? He's just trying to just poke the bear here. He knows he's going to get this response. Um, so, I wanted to ask you about it.
Okay.
So he wrote a piece. Everyone should read it. I'll put a link to it in the notes of this episode. He wrote a piece called "On Scientific Fascism" or something like that.
That's
Or
it. Yeah.
yeah,
On scientific fascism. Yeah.
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 Okay, we can get into it a little bit, but okay, why did you write the piece? That's what I want to know.
All
Like,
right.
why did you write
That's
the
the
piece?
best question.
That's what I want to know, right? We can debate all day. There was a
Yeah.
bunch of threads going, and people were picking it apart and just being like, "Oh my god!" Like,
Yeah.
I want to
Well,
know why you wrote it, and
okay.
what was your motivation, and what were you trying to get people to see or whatever.
Okay. Well, the motivation, just in the broadest sense, is I think that there is a movement to deal with woke policies through science. It's not as if these is so one way of thinking about this is instrumental rationality. That's sort of the neutral term for using science to combat something, right? So it's instrumental rationality. Woke people are stupid, or woke people somehow don't understand how logic works, and so therefore they're coming to these conclusions irrationally, this type of thing. Okay. So it's instrumental rationality, but it's used to combat social justice and woke ideas, which will lead to the entrenching or at least prevention of equality between people. So the idea is that the woke policies are trying to deal with inequality. And here you are coming with these ideas to sort of cut the activists out, or cut the I'm getting tired now, I think.
You're
cut
fine.
the
You're fine.
cut the idea part of the activists push out from under them, cut the ideological legs out from under them
Hmm.
using science.
So
And so
you're
that's I'm calling it scientific fascism. Yeah.
okay. So your motivation was, I don't like the scientific method being used as a weapon for um, uh, trying to disavow the ideas espoused by social justice or
Right. Any of
colloquially
those
woke
things.
people.
I mean, it's amazing. Look, and I cut you out, but now I'm getting a second wind.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
But yeah, it's like, and I noticed this a long time ago when I started trying to communicate these ideas online. Any idea that says that minorities, that there's some issue with minorities that needs to be addressed, people will attack it through science. Microaggressions. Oh, something's wrong with that. Let me tell you why. Dot, 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 dot. Heteronormativity. What? Let me tell you how this is wrong. The research on this is wrong. You got to think about this. And you get all of these people, they're always anonymous. They're always, not all the time, but often they're anonymous. They have these avatars of enlightenment thinkers or something because they're all rational, right? And they're going to sit on their couch. It's also this element of superiority. They're going to sit on their couch and just through logic and reason understand how these people who've gone through their university and PhDs and all this stuff and collected all this evidence and data, how they're wrong. And I was like, look, let me explain. Like, there's some evidence to it. It's more complex. Well, see, this is this is a Mott and Bailey here, or this is I don't know what, a tautology or something. Coming with all these, And so I was like, look, I see what you're doing here. You're trying to show that you are smarter than these people who are so stupid about things. And so that's kind of how it started. It's attacking those ideas that support social justice. Absolutely. I understand saying fascism is a bit incendiary. That was by design. So yes, I was poking the bear a little bit, but it's
Not for
not
me. It wasn't for me. I was like, oh, okay, go ahead, Ron. I see what you're doing. That's fine by me. That's cool. I know other people were like, oh my God, but I didn't personally feel that way. I was like, oh, I get it.
But you have to see that. I'm sure you've seen these types, who are sort of trying to use rationality and logic and reason in a very abstract way, like outside of actual evidence. They just can just think their way through things. I think it's very dangerous. They want to reject um, this idea of personal experiences, and that doesn't matter because there's this universal way of thinking. That's incredibly dangerous because you end up erasing people's perspectives in the name of the truth, right? I mean, what does that even mean? So, okay, I have the truth. Through a battle of ideas, somehow my idea is the best. If you take that view, that's incredibly arrogant and that's dangerous and fascist, because then you can say, well, you see, obviously I have the truth, so whatever you think is wrong. Not just different, right? Wrong. You didn't come to the conclusions because you have different experiences and different sets of information. No, you're not intelligent. You don't have the intellectual tools I have. Pity you. I know what needs to be done. And I mean, so yeah, I was kind of the title was a little meant to get people to look at it, but I'm deadly serious about the actual content of the piece.
Well, yeah. I mean, I look, having written a few things myself, and creating a title every week or so for a podcast episode. You definitely want a hook, right? You want to get people in. I'm not mad at you about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so here's my. I'm just gonna hit it. Just because I know we've been going for a while. I hear you. I hear you 100% actually, and I don't disagree with you actually on much of that. Here's my points of difference. I think you tell me, you correct me, but you're making an assumption about people's motivations behind some of these things,
I am. Yes.
right? Which I think is, hey, I mean,
People don't like that.
I mean, listen, I don't know what your risk budget is, but that's risky. That's a risky thing, and I, right, and I think I think sometimes that can be, um, you can misalign people in those ways because I think this is the crazy thing about it, right? People don't even know half the time their own motivations, right? They're acting on impulse, they're acting on emotion, or they're acting on pure reason alone. But I don't know if everybody is, kind of lurking behind the bushes trying to just take cheap shots at people. there are, listen, on Twitter especially, plenty of people like that. I mean, no question. But I think that it is important to take things on their ideas, because the ideas themselves are, it's a lens, it's a way of seeing the world. And I think when you can have or try to shoot for some objectivity or neutrality and all that stuff, you're trying to say this is something that we know. Now, that doesn't mean lived experiences or personal experiences aren't valid or they're not relevant, right? You can do that philosophically, right? This is the whole phenomenological enterprise. You can do this in the social sciences, right? Sociology does this, social psych, clinical psych. We all do this, right? For the listeners, there's basically this way of approaching um, research, and there's different types of data. So the way I was trained was you have big D data and you have little d data, right? Big D data is kind of the quantitative stuff, right? How are you trying to understand patterns and behaviors and phenomena through a series of data points, right? This is where you get your stats and you do your descriptive and inferential statistics and all the rest.
Mm.
That leads us to facts or things that are true in the natural world. That is the scientific method, that's a part of it. You also have qualitative data, which is looking at phenomena that is much harder to quantify, but you attempt to do that. And in some ways, trying to look at subjective emotional experiences relies on this, and you're doing this through observation, ethnographs, interviews, all the rest, right? I don't think that there's a battle between quantitative or qualitative ways of obtaining information. I will say quantitative data is concerned with how do we have different types of external validity. So now I'm getting a little technical here, but um, in external validity, you have something that has population and ecology validity, which all that means is how are you able to take the data from your study and make it have generalizability, is the word, to say, how does this scale for groups across the board? And that is much more difficult to do with qualitative data. I'm not saying you can't, but it's much more difficult because your qualitative data, and look, in quantitative data, for example, I'll just give an example. If you look at a kind of the gold standard, if you will, and this is true of the physical sciences and the social sciences. If you look at a study that's double blind, which means no one, the control group or the placebo, the main study group, they don't know they're being studied, and then the researchers don't know their study, and it's randomized, which is what you want, so it doesn't any selection. There's different ways of doing that, and it has a sample size of 4,000 people. That'd be a great study. So it has a lot of power, and you can wear your head on it or hang your hat on it. And it has all these things, and it's one study. Well, a lot of the times what happens in research with one study is they're doing self-report measures to undergraduate students, at some white university in the Midwest. And there's problems with some of the methodology. And a lot of times that's just funding and all the rest. So I'm not saying that there isn't pros and cons to both. All this to say, both have their place in science. And so I think for folks that are worth their salt, people that are scholars, social scientists, academics, if they make criticisms on the ideas, they are typically coming at it from, I would give the benefit of the doubt from the ethics in research, that they're coming at it to try and say, how do we look at this data objectively? Does it fit? Does it align? I don't want to immediately assume that they have a bias, that they're just trying to tear down, uh, social justice or wokeism. Some people do that and they make a career out of that and whatever. But I think for a lot of people, they're not trying to do that. I think they're just trying to say, look, this is there's issues with some of these data points. There's issues with some of these concepts because they're not aligning with the quantitative or qualitative data. Is there cross-cultural studies? Is there longitudinal studies? Is there cross-sectional studies? Is there ways of how we understand that? And then how do you incorporate both qualitative and quantitative data? And I don't think they're in opposition with each other. I think you need both. But I think that to assume, well, if people are just fighting against some of these ideas, they're just super biased and they don't like the ideology, so they'll just hide behind the scientific method and tear it down. I grant you that some people do that, but I would say that most often, if they're good scientists and good scholars, they're not going to try to do that from the start. That would be my position.
I do not disagree. I am sure that the people
sorry,
who
that was
I'm
very long.
interacting
Sorry.
with, say again.
I'm sorry, I was very long-winded. I'm sorry about that, but
No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't disagree. I'm sure that there are people who are genuinely interested in the validity of those ideas. That's absolutely the case. I think what's happened with me is over time, I see the same people. And as the topic changes,
mm-hmm.
it's always that, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this?
Yeah.
Like there's never like, oh yeah, you know what, this makes sense to me. Never. And so it occurs to me for those people. So
Sure.
I mean, you're right. There's some people who don't do that. Yeah. And so it occurred to me that, what's happening here? And so one question you can ask a person, right, is okay, like they'll throw out something like, I don't have anything in my head right now, but white privilege or something, and
I was going to say the
how do you measure
microaggressions
that?
piece. You brought up
Again?
microaggressions.
Oh, the
Right?
micro, yeah.
Right.
I put that up,
Right.
and there's this guy. I don't know if he's or person. I don't know what it is. He fits the profile.
Right.
He's got a picture,
an avatar
of
or something.
And so he's explaining how this study could be wrong, unless he's some kind of academic or somebody who's invested a lot of time. You don't have to be an academic to know this stuff. Invested a lot of time in it. How in the world does he know that this study is so bad and it's so flawed and all this stuff? And he's done that with all these other, and he's actually a nice guy when we're not talking about social justice stuff. And we're talking about something different, which is rare. Like one time we talked about beer or something. I don't know. It's okay. He's not assessing the validity of the beer. But when it comes to these social justice stuff, he's on it. So I think that there's a collection of people out there, and I'm trying to fuse it eventually to a kind of classical liberal falling back on a very idealized view of the Enlightenment. We're all individuals, and so therefore, any study that shows that there's group differences and identity groups, it must be flawed somewhere, and so I'm going to find the answer. This started a long time, so I'm going to call this person out by name. He's a nice person, actually.
Go ahead.
Jonathan Church. Jonathan Church has written quite a few pieces on Robin DiAngelo, and he has a book out now that I haven't read, but it just came out, and he's a good writer, so it may be worth checking out, about white fragility or a new way of thinking about whiteness or something of that title. And so when I read his first few pieces, what was in Quillette and then in Ariel, I said, wow, this guy is looking at this in a purely logical way. He has no access, as I can tell, to any data or any prior research done by sociologists or any social scientists. He's simply reading DiAngelo and saying, here's the fallacy in her thinking. Which, I mean, it's a beautiful, it's a wonderful, I wouldn't say beautiful, but it's a wonderful intellectual feat to do that. But to me, that just seemed like, okay, again, this is me impugning motives. This is me thinking, okay, this guy does not like the idea that this woman is propagating this. So how can he delegitimize that idea? It's logically flawed. That's it. Forget about the data. Forget about the history that goes into the study. Forget about the other studies that may converge on her ideas. By the way, I should tell you, I had a guy on, Cedric Simmons, who hates Robin DiAngelo's work.
Mm-hmm.
But he and I both agree that the summaries at the beginning and the conclusions that lead up to her assumptions about white folks being fragile are well known across the social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that why in the world would you go in a diversity setting and try and tell people that they're fragile? It's just not smart.
Mm-hmm.
So our as sociologists, our argument hinged on that.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Church's idea is all about the logic behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on. I mean, this is obviously you just don't like the idea. I shouldn't say that, but that's the way I feel. And
Yeah.
I saw that with a lot of pieces on Ario and Quillette.
Mm-hmm.
No connection to the literature, no evidence, no
Mm-hmm.
data, nothing. Just, oh, I figured it out. This
Mm-hmm.
is the problem
Mm-hmm.
from my couch, you know. And I find a problem with that. And it's all about pushing back on these ideas. Um, I should say though, Xavier, you're absolutely right. In most cases, it's the ideas that matter more than the person. And me assuming that people are coming at this because they want to tear down social justice ideas uh, is probably a wrong step for me. I don't know how I'm going to deal with that because I still like the idea that people are doing this. So maybe a second thing I can write can rectify that. But I'm glad for the input because I need it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think again. I mean, I think it just goes to the other point of this stuff is really complicated, and I think. I mean, so I hear you. I hear you. I hear you for sure. Like I see these same people too. And one of the things that I get, um, and I can't expect that from everybody, but one of the things I get frustrated by is right. People will just say it's never really a balanced type of critique or review, right? It's usually this is garbage, and then here is why, here, and here. Now, there's support for why some of the ideas aren't, so good could be true, like when you compare it. But it doesn't mean that it's not unbalanced, right? Now, sometimes there's just bad stuff out there, right? I'm not a fan of Robin DiAngelo. I have many reasons why I don't like her. But I don't have my enterprise to just go and be like, okay, boom, 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 boom. Here's where you're wrong. Here's where I'm right. The end. I just don't do that. Like, it's just not interesting for me. I think you can talk about the ideas and say, okay, well, what's the understanding? What's the motivation? Okay, I'm trying to understand that. Let me try and see. I try to come at it objectively of sorts. But I think the hard thing about this is, I mean, again, I go back to my external validity thing. To have things to be able to be generalized to people within society and within communities, you just can't lean on heavily or overwhelmingly on qualitative or lived experience.
Oh,
It just
sure.
doesn't it
I
doesn't
get
it
that
doesn't
totally. It
scale.
doesn't have to be the qualitative stuff.
Hmm.
People are trying to. So systemic racism became something of a deal, like at the beginning of 2020s, and I went on like a Brave Angel show and talked about it and all that stuff.
Hmm.
It's the same thing.
Hmm.
Oh, this is trying to say that there's all these problems with race. Okay, let me tell you how this is wrong. Or I think James Lindsay wrote a piece. Well, how do you explain systemic racism? Is it institutional? Is it da 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 da? Of
Hmm.
course, no engagement with the sociological research on it
Hmm.
or nothing. Just see, it's wrong. This is a
Right.
problem for me. I don't really like that. I mean, you're right that you can't generalize from qualitative data points. That's absolutely the case. A lot of the questions that come, most qualitative researchers aren't asking questions about generalizability
Hmm.
in the way that I think people outside, because that's actually a big a point that people talk about online a lot. It's not generalizable. It's not generalizable, and they're right about that. But I think that as a qualitative researcher, you're not necessarily trying to generalize.
Hmm.
You're trying to understand a situation as much as possible, and then another person can come along and do that again and again and again and again, and then
Hmm.
you get this richness of data and this kind of patterns that show over time. And so I kind of, you know,
Right. And I agree with that. And I think that's why but I think that's why when there's, for some people, whether it's D'Angelo or whomever, they might be looking at social psychosociological data or anthropology. But if it's heavily on one type of data or predominantly, it's hard to then say, yeah, well, these ideas are great. It's like, no, that might be fine in one subset or one context or whatever, but I think it's hard to then apply it outward. I'll
Yeah.
give you an example real quick. When I did my dissertation, I was looking at the impact of shame, the social emotion in individuals with multiple sclerosis, and it was an empirical study. Small n, it's big funding and stuff like that. So it was, not big sample size like everyone would want. And I remember I was working with my dissertation chairwoman, and she was one of these like brilliant people that had 2 PhDs. She's so smart, and I mean, she was wonderful because she had just such a holistic picture, and she said, "Okay, here's all of the quantitative stuff." She's like, "We have to take seriously how we also incorporate qualitative stuff and how are we capturing that." And I said, "Oh, you're right." And so we did both, right? Just meant more work for me. God, I hate transcribing and trying. Oh God, it's terrible, right? It just sucks doing it. But like it, and I had to create certain types of vignettes and scenarios, and then trying to get information about different aspects of the emotion, which fits for the research. And that stuff was very telling, right? Especially in a smaller sample size. It was really it brought the data more to life in a certain way. Now that's not true all the time,
Hmm.
but I wasn't leaning on one more than the other. I still had my data set. I still did my multiple regression. I still did all of that, and that was necessary, right? Because then you can make certain inferences or certain statements about your correlation values and saying, okay, this is true for this small sample set. Future directions, here's some limitations, but maybe if you do a similar study with a larger sample size, maybe it does scale within, I was looking at a specific population, but maybe that looks similar to that way. No, I couldn't do that with a couple of vignettes or some semi-structured interviews. That would be helpful, but it would be less robust. And so I think that there needs to be a balance of both things. And so for people that are maybe hypercritical or using the logical rational arguments against some of the social justice stuff, is that it's very my reading of it is that it can tend to be lots of ideology and somewhat flimsy on the quantitative data.
Mm.
That's how I see some of it, not all of it, but some of it.
Yeah, I see that as well, actually, as someone who at least is supposed to be a quantitative scholar, although I do mixed method stuff now. So
No, that's
yeah, no,
that's that's
I
important.
see that. I see that totally. We never got to. I know we're kind of wrapping up, but we never got to talk about what critical social science is in general, which is unfortunate because I think people need to know like what that's all about. Well, actually, this might be a good time because you just gave the
Listen,
two poles. The
listen. I got the time. It's fine. Go ahead. We'll go.
Okay,
We'll push a little
yeah.
more. Push a little more.
All right, yeah. Let's end with this. I
Okay.
have the
Yeah.
time, but I'm getting a little tired. Even my
Yeah.
voice is starting to give out. So you got the qualitative and quantitative, right?
Yeah.
The two poles. Okay, one obviously looks for the quantitative is looking for generalizable laws,
Mhm.
and they'll forsake some in-depth analysis for generalizability. So with social science, it usually means that when we have some kind of quantitative data, we're only explaining between 15 and 40% of an actual phenomenon, meaning the variables that I have in my model will only predict with accuracy 40% of the time, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just nothing like hard sciences. But we know that
Right.
because there's too many variables to take into account. I mean, can you imagine trying to predict whether someone is having sex or not that night? How many
Right.
variables go into that?
Right.
Would go into
Well,
that?
and this is why you would do in this way on the quantitative side, and this is why it's so hard and takes so long, is you would do something like a factor analysis, right? Which is a inferential type of statistic that you use to try and look at what's the underlying or common variable
Right, right, right.
with a million variables, and then you're able to make really strong correlation factors to show, that this is because of this and not these 7 other things, right? So that would be an
Okay.
example of that.
Okay. Yeah. So because you're explaining 40%, you might have a generalizable law like poverty is related to crime and this one, but you're only accurate 40% of the time. Okay. In many situations, you don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know as much as possible about a situation. So you may do qualitative research
Mm-hmm.
where you say, you know what, maybe it's not generalizable in the way that hard data is, but I think this will tell me more about a situation in a particular city or particular family. And in the end, it might be more accurate because I'm taking in more information.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
and I and I see
Mm-hmm.
that actually.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to understand family dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
you can't go with like 10 variables and try and predict whether or not, something bad is going to happen to the family or if the kids are going to do well. You really need to be in there taking data. Okay, fine. So that's quantitative and qualitative. When I teach my research methods class, critical social science is kind of a middle way
Mm-hmm.
that is goal oriented. And that's the problem for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people. So it starts with this idea that there is oppression in society.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be activists. And so we're going to use whatever method is available, quantitative or qualitative, to deal with oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, oh, they start with the answer and then they go work back and try and find the problem, you assume racism and then this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, critical scholars, which is really the bulk of scholars, not the CT guys or the theorists, but the actual run of the mill scholars,
Mm-hmm.
they will use quantitative research if they have to. They'll use qualitative research if they have to. But the idea is that they're focusing on some type of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Assume it, given what we already know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually quite so when I'm always thinking about critical theory and I'm trying to explain it to people, I tell them, I say, look, it's just social science. The problem that people have with it is that it's goal oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And they probably don't know that that's the problem they have with it, but that is actually the issue. Scholars are trying to deal with sexism. So if you or transphobia. So if you decide that you want to deal with transphobia, then you're going to ask a research question about transphobia.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to create knowledge
Mm-hmm.
about transphobia, and
Mm-hmm.
it could be quantitative, it can be qualitative, it
Mm-hmm.
could be a mix. And I actually don't believe that a lot of the research is just qualitative. I think the sexy research is qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think the things that get out to journals and stuff, or to op-ed pieces and stuff, it's easy and accessible.
Yeah.
And so people go, wow, so like toxic masculinity,
Mm-hmm.
forget it. If you go look at the journals, you'll see quantitative study after quantitative study looking at the effect of young men on their values as of being in a hierarchy and violence and all that stuff. And it can be quantitative. But then you say, how can I explain this? Cool. Toxic masculinity. And then you go and you talk to people and you come up with some study that people can read. And anyway, I guess I'm
So
kind of going on.
no, that's good. Here's my response to that a little bit is,
Mhm.
so this to me um, is, after just kind of giving my 10-minute, stats lecture, um, the science, the scientific study and scientific method, qualitative or quantitative, is just that. It is a method. It is a tool.
Yeah.
I am not a absolutist on this, and I don't think science has limits. And I don't. And what you're saying, the kind of goal oriented stuff, is not the be all end all. So, as an example, when someone wants to conduct a study, they have to conduct, well, let's just leave aside, grants and funding and all that stuff, right? Because that's motivated, who's going to pay the bill on it, okay, who's going to let you do all this stuff? Let's put that aside for a minute. Just if you want to do a study, it starts with a question and then a series of hypotheses, right? This is just another way of saying what you're saying in terms of like, there's a goal, right? I want to look at this and this. I want to look at this relationship with this relationship, or this interaction with this interaction.
Mm-hmm.
That's before you do the science in whichever way it looks like. And to me, those questions are coming from somewhere, right? Again, leaving off kind of the bureaucracy and the red tape and all that. To me, what sits beyond science is philosophy. People are asking questions or wanting to know certain things about phenomena in the world for a certain reason. We can't know what that reason is for the researchers or for scientists necessarily. Why are some people super animated about race and IQ? I don't know. Why are some people super interested in gender and what that looks like, or sex differences, or take your pick. There's something where and people will find whatever their universe is, and they'll park there. But even before you get there, there is something internal, or there's something intrinsic about how you're viewing the world, or how you're seeing potential observations or patterns of phenomena, either from your perspective or in the world or other people's perspective, and then you want to know about it. So before you even get to the science, doing it, running the study, doing the uh, doing all the stats, you're asking those questions, and they're coming from somewhere, and that is coming from, I think, what your worldview is or what your philosophy is about certain things. And then that's dictating a lot of the times where people spend years sometimes studying things. And that also is, that's more of the abstraction, right? And I think that those questions, or those goals, or those motivations are important, right? And if somebody is just trying to say, here's an idea, let me find it, let me prove it with hard data or whatever, yeah, you can do that, right? It's the whole filing drawer problem in stats, right? You can make the data say what you want it to say. But I think if you say, look, here's my perspective, here's where this is coming from, let's see what happens. Some hypotheses, here's some ways I might think about it, but I could be wrong, or this might not be good, or let me go and have it with the most rigor of, that's why we do peer review and all the rest within the science, and see if it holds. Okay. And I think there are, for me, in I'll speak in my field, within psychology and the different branches of and subsets of psychology, a big problem with that. There's a big problem with that. People become too hyperpolarized, they become an echo chamber, and everyone is just agreeing or doing the same things. There's less diversity of thought, there's too much ideology, and it's not allowing for people to do good science where you're trying to say, yeah, I have my questions, that's fine. Yeah, I might have my ideas, that's fine. But let's see what the data says. Let's have it be scrutinized by peer review. Let's see if it holds up. Let's see if it replicates. And a lot of the times, what's happening in some of the humanities and some of the social sciences is that's not happening. And that to me is a big problem. And that's in my own field. Like, I'm picking on my field, right? Like, that's happening in clinical psych, in social psych, forensic psych. That's happening, and that's a problem, because then you can't trust the science, right? Because if you were to do this in, let's say, a majority of the people that are doing these studies, they're all conservative right-wing people, there'd be a lot of animus about that. And rightfully so. Whatever their philosophy and worldview and ideology is, and they're doing it that way, that would be a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or the reverse. There was a big study that was done that showed that in the social sciences, it's 90% liberal. Okay, maybe that makes you feel good. Maybe that makes me feel good. But that's too much. That's too 90-10 is too much.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
that creates an echo chamber. And that's
uh-huh.
not wise.
I agree with you in the fact that, so this is the way that I always explain that, because you're right about that. And that's something we've been, you know, I've been knowing, we have known for a while, is that I still think you can trust the science. Um, I mean, if I do, so as a progressive, I'm interested in understanding how social structures generally impact people. So the questions I'm going to ask about sex work ultimately are going to boil down to, what policy can better help sex workers, have a good life or something. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
what'll happen eventually, but that's the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those are the kind of questions that I'm interested in. Whereas a conservative may be interested in, okay, I want family values. How can I stop, someone from going to, who knows? I don't know how that would work out.
Mm-hmm.
But the methods that I'm using and the conclusions that I have are still valid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just I'm asking different questions. So I would not say I don't trust what comes out. I would say that you're right. We need more people asking different questions.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I
But
totally
like
agree.
even at culture, we were talking about structure culture earlier, and we simply don't have enough sociologists asking questions about the impact of culture on people because it's kind of
Sure.
taboo.
Yeah, no, listen, I
Yeah.
agree. And that's, I mean, that's that's your fight. You got to fight all your fellow sociologists. But no, I agree. I'm not saying I
Yeah.
don't trust the science. I do. But I'm saying that um resistance to that is dangerous, and people do that, right? People say like, whatever, I don't trust the science. Like it's all blah blah blah. They're all biased, this, that, and the third. And I think when you look at things in certain programs or certain places where there's a 90-10 split of bias in terms of everyone asking these questions about society or humans is 90% liberal progressive. Well, that's problematic, and that's not going to make people feel better about trusting the science. Might make me feel good, might make you feel good,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a lot of people that aren't going to feel good. And I think we have to do a better job of diversifying that, of saying, how do we get just what you're saying? How do we get people asking different types of questions? And how do we, and we push that kind of diversity to say, okay, we need to make that normative. And, I mean, that's the work for the field and for sciences. So, okay.
All right.
That's a good amount of time. See, I told you these 2 hours go by fast. They do,
Oh
man.
man,
You,
I got
you,
some exercise standing up like this for a
you were
couple
you were
hours.
you were worried you couldn't do it. I was like, you'll be fine. We're gonna get
Okay,
into
and I
it.
didn't have to stop for the bathroom, which is
Right, me neither.
something.
There you go. So, look, this was too much fun. I really enjoy this. I enjoy the conversation that we had on your show channel on 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
This was a lot of fun. I greatly enjoyed this a lot. I hope you did too. And you're always welcome to come back. And you want to try ideas or anything like that, just hit me up and we can do this again.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. It's nice.
Of course, I appreciate it.